Yeah, so it's Vishal from Prowler.io. So the full name of the company is actually Prowler.io and not Prowler, because if you guys do a search, you'll find out why. Actually, before I start, so there's something I really want to speak about, and especially going into the nature of the event, that it's more about applied, and I thought we'll talk a bit about the general industry as a whole, some of the key challenges. And there's something very specific that's been bothering me for a few months, actually slightly over 2 years, but I think the level of botherness increased substantially over the last couple of weeks because of the media hyping up a lot about the dangers of machine learning AI, as if something really bad was going to happen and stuff like that. And I think it's time for us to, as an industry, to do something about it. Because if you don't, then it could have quite negative consequences. So to start with, does anybody here speak Greek or can read Greek? Okay, I can't. I use the Google Translate. So, so if you can't, then let's assume this is something by a famous Greek philosopher, and probably, given that probably Latin is more popular, can anybody read this? What that means? It's a translation of the previous one, so that's a hint.
By the way, the previous one was modern Greek, right?
If you can, don't spoil the suspense. Was it modern?
It is modern.
Okay, I have no idea. I just used Google Translate, didn't give me an option for ancient Greek. So it translates into AI will save the world, sort of, yeah. And that's using Google Translate again, so I think it's fairly, at least in English, I understand that's right. But of course, you must have realized by now that I at least have no background in philosophy. So I just came up with something and thought, probably to make a point. I'm an engineer by training. I'm not trained to speak on philosophy. That's why I don't speak on philosophy. Even if I try, it would be, pretty bad. Of course, over the last few years, a lot of philosophers, people with in all sorts of universities and well, people who also study black holes spoke about machine learning. And then people from the machine learning industry went and spoke to them. The people who talk about black holes understood what we were talking about and stopped complaining about AI being very bad. But the philosophers carried on. Now, obviously, it begs the question that why is the press so interested in or actually hyping up this whole stuff about philosophers talking about AI? Why is it getting so much kind of bandwidth and so much oxygen? Well, the reason is pretty simple. It's all about fear, right? Because fear sells. So while we've come up with a fantastically good tool set, we in the industry know, which can solve which can help to solve all sorts of problems, from cancer to disease to better design of cars, and like a variety of other problems it could potentially solve. And instead of most of the world being happy about it, the state of affairs seems to be like this, right? So it's but actually the way it should be something like this, right? So the reason why all this is happening is down to this, right? I'm sure some of you have kind of read these books. I honestly couldn't get myself to read them. I did watch the TED Talks and videos about these books, and they weren't funny, I mean, to the point that you just have to look at look at the way you're actually going about it, artificial intelligence and the end of human error. Right? And it's our final invention. And out here, it's all about paths, dangers, and strategy. And here it's about surviving AI. And very little, if you have eyes like mine, you can't see, but the promise is somewhere at the bottom. So essentially, why it's happening is that fear sells. And it also sells a lot of movies. So for example, some of the top grossing movies over the last few years, if you go to Wikipedia, are Jurassic Park, Exorcist, well, Dracula long ago. I couldn't get the actual figures on that, but eventually, the point is there. So when you are going to write books like that, I think it should come with a disclaimer that it's faction or fiction or whatever you want to call it, but let's try to have some balance in terms of discussion. It's okay to bring up risks, but there has to be some sort of a balance around that. And of course, fear also sells demagogues, right? And if they want to be taken seriously, they keep making more and more kind of outrageous claims, day in, day out. And if they can't be taken seriously, they'll do all sorts of stuff, right? They'll go to all sorts of extent to do that. For example, this gentleman you know very well. But there's a much more serious side to it. So every few years or every few decades, you get into a situation where entire industries are destroyed and a lot of jobs lost because of this crazy demagoguery. I'm old enough to remember the 1990s, where in the US there was this huge amount of debate around genetic research. And a lot of industry got closed. A lot of those top researchers moved to Europe. They were having all kind of crazy legislation around this topic. And well, fortunately in Britain we were busy making Dolly and its sisters and brothers. And that kind of went well. And in more recent times, it's all about drones, where again, US is starting to lose out because at least till about 2 or 3 months ago, you required a private pilot's license to be able to fly a drone. Whereas, of course, in Britain, things are moving better. So essentially, I think it's time for us to, especially in the industry, to take a stand and to move forward and start spreading the positive message. And I think that was my primary motivation to come to this forum. And hopefully, well, you guys obviously all are quite positive about it, but at least get the idea that we guys should do something about it. So, as you probably have realized by now, I'm here to talk about the good stuff. So what do we guys do at Prowler? We do the good AI. So what it really does is we are using reinforcement learning and inverse reinforcement learning to essentially build a platform of AI bots, so which are able to adapt to the environment, learn to mimic humans, and compete and collaborate with other bots. And I'll come to the applications why we are doing that. But at a very high level way, the entire reason why we think about the whole thing is that what can be learned should not be handcrafted. We have a pretty strong views on that. And so I hope you guys can see this. So we have this notion of a vanilla bot into which you can inject a learned behavior, which in this case is a dragon in a game. And then the vanilla bot changes its expression slightly and then becomes a dragon and goes back into a large simulated environment, which could be a game, a massively multiplayer online game, or some sort of a smart city simulation, or any case of any sort of simulated environment where you're trying to train smart cars, drones, autonomous cars, and so on and so forth. A bit about the founding team. One of them is here, Alexei. Are you here? Yeah, there he is. Yeah. So we are 3 founders. So that's Dongo, who couldn't join us. So he's got his PhD in machine learning and was also with me at Vocal IQ. And Alexei did some fantastic work in building or actually training robots using a reinforcement learning framework. So we can talk a bit about that later. In terms of what can be used for, the AI bots that we are building are the first use case is games. And for us, the games is really the starting point of what we are trying to achieve. And there's a very good reason why we guys are starting with games. Because when it comes to any of these use cases, autonomous cars, smart city simulations, drones, the way we see it, it's a decision-making problem. So when we use reinforcement learning and POMDP and all those frameworks for decision-making, so there are about 3 key things that are very important. One is the quality of the decision-making. The other is the predictability of the decision-making. And the third one is the timeliness. And all those things become very important because, for example, if you're talking about timeliness, it's very different related to a game of chess versus a car hurtling down the road at 70 miles per hour. And then at the same time, there's always going to be a trade-off between the quality of decision-making and the timeliness in terms of how many, how much you can think, so to speak. So the way we thought about going about it is that we felt that because in the games industry, we guys have access to a lot of data. And when we train our bots, in case they do something crazy, there is no real impact. You know, some player might die, or some non-playing character might die, or you know, it might be slightly unpredictable. But from a player's perspective, it'll be just hopefully fun. So, but once, as you guys know, it's going to be a very iterative process to kind of train the bots and as we move along. So our next target is that once we guys are confident about our models, is to move to smart city simulations, where essentially you're still using a simulated environment, but you're trying to make real-world decisions based on that, based on the bots. So essentially, that should, and once we have enough kind of confidence, I mean, because in that scenario we can also match it against human intuition and human experience, we get more and more like feel of how things are going. And once we are confident of that, then we are able to stick the AI bots or the models into some cars and drones. Of course, there might be an intermediary step. We might end up sticking into some toy robots and toy cars. So I think I already went through it, why games are the best way to start. So I'll skip this. And actually what we're talking about was highlighted quite well about 4 weeks ago in one of the articles from Economist, where they were talking about these unfortunate incidents with the likes of Tesla and you know, some other people, where a lot of testing of vehicles and drones seem to be happening in a more real environment. So there's obviously a case for testing autonomous vehicles virtually in a similar environment, and that's what we're trying to do with different customers and partners. From the games industry specifically, our experience talking to a lot of game developers over the last few months has been that handcrafting behavior is very, very hard to do, and that seems to be the standard way of managing things inside a games industry. Effectively, as far as we know, all games as of today, all the behavior data of the non-playing characters is all handcrafted, and that's where we do believe that we can add a lot of value. So if you are playing, say, a first-person shooter, you guys probably are experienced that this huge amount of repeatability of the way the opponents behaves. And it's fun 2 or 3 times, but then you keep on, you know, whacking the guy in kind of 30 seconds, and it starts to get quite boring and repetitive. And that's where what we can do actually improves. And that also adds to simulated worlds, you know, like adding a lot of benefits there. What makes our bots unique? I think that's another thing that we do think a lot about, is while they are tunable and while they are self-learning and while they are autonomous, so we work on having a very strong notion of controllability. So there's always a very strong notion of having a kill switch so that this Skynet doesn't happen. So that's you know, sort of that's really it. So just keeping it quite brief, and that's us. So at this moment, typically, you know, a lot of companies do say that they're hiring. I won't say that, but I'll say that our email is careers@prowler.io.
Has anyone got any questions? Should we try just standing up and shouting out the question? Save my
More of an observation than a question, actually. I'm wondering if you're not too optimistic about what we can do about machine learning and those philosophers basically endangering the progress of machine learning and spread in society. There was an EU directive, unless maybe you put yourself in a Brexit war, but apart from this, there was an EU directive that will potentially limit the use and the scope of machine learning whenever it's applied to actual decision making, and potentially creating a right to explainability that none of the models, any of the advanced machine learning companies are using, none of them are really explainable in the sense that statistics model used to. And if indeed that takes effect, then will have to just surrender or fight? I don't know.
So I think it's a
Could you repeat the question?
yeah. So I think the question was related to the EU directive, and it's actually very good that you mentioned. So there's a directive from the EU which should be, if it goes through, should be effective in 2018. And to paraphrase what you just said, effectively states that for every algorithmic decision making to be allowed in any process inside the European Union, it should always be verified by a human. So I have actually read the a directive, and I have discussed it with our legal team. And so I think that's a very good example of why scaremongering is actually leading the charge, and because of all this ignorance around how the industry works is leading to something like that, and that's where we come in. And the thing to, if you actually read that directive very carefully, effectively even things like blood tests, as mundane as blood tests, would become basically illegal apart from a human actually going with an optical periscope and looking at the germs. Because even when you do a blood test these days, you don't really check kind of per se. There are algorithms, and your blood kind of automatically runs through these very fancy machines. There's spectroscopy and all sorts of fancy bits involved, and you get results and you accept them. And eventually there are algorithms that are actually making that a decision for you. So what I feel, and the people I work with feel, that it's a very misguided thing. Your point about explanation around algorithms is a valid one. But I would not say that all the algorithms that we have in machine learning are unexplainable. So that's not really strictly true. So for sure, if you have deep neural nets, I'm not an expert at all this, but you have a notion in certain cases of a black box which is hard to explain, but there is still input and output, right? So there has to be an effort made to be able to do that, but that EU directive or that EU legislation that you're trying to get in its present form is not the right answer.
So I feel like I might be derailing a bit, but you've discussed about this Skynet thing. So you're saying that it's hands down impossible to kick something off that would not have serious, unpredictable repercussions in the future?
So what I'm saying is that, yeah, sorry. So the question was that, is Skynet impossible? So while history is not a good predictor of the future in all cases, but being an engineer, and I was actually thinking about it, of course talking to other people, and I'm still to find any machine that's ever been designed that doesn't have a notion of kill switch and stopping it. Because if you really think about it, software is not like virus or bacteria that can basically multiply and have billions of iterations a minute or like an hour. It's not at like a DNA level things are happening.
But it can. If everything is interconnected, you get onto the internet, right, and then you lose control of it. It's like a web.
How do you lose control? I think because it is interconnected, but it's being powered, right? And there are different modules and machines, so they are discrete elements, right? So I honestly, from a pure engineering design perspective, I can't understand how the discrete components can be all of a sudden forgotten, because actually somebody put them together, and there has to be a protocol to put them together. There's a protocol how they talk to each other. Okay. So it's very hard to understand.
To make it so you can't switch it off, then through that logic, you can't switch it off.
So in science fiction, sure. In terms of engineering rules, I would love to have that discussion and explain how. I haven't been able to figure it out. Yeah. Sorry.
Thanks. Just wondering, you mentioned that you base your company around reinforcement learning.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering whether it makes sense for you to hitch your ride into one specific paradigm of machine learning, because all of the problems you mentioned can be approached in various ways. And some could be better, some could be worse. So I'm just wondering what the idea behind specifically reinforcement learning is.
Right. So I think, and I'll let kind of Alexi talk a bit more on that. So when we speak about, okay, so the question was that, are we stuck on reinforcement learning and not doing anything at all to solve those problems? So I guess just for adding a bit of simplicity to the presentation and not giving our secret sauce away. So we say we use reinforcement learning and inverse reinforcement learning, but obviously if we are going to use something like POM DPs, they themselves will require a lot of kind of jiggery pokery, fixing and building things around. So there's going to be, some other elements, and we are happy to talk to you about this after that. Alex, do you have something to add?
Sure. So reinforcement learning, there's specific reinforcement learning techniques, like, Q-learning and things based on the value function, but often reinforcement learning can be thought of as more just as a framework of thinking about you have an agent that learns from sparse amounts of data and starting from not necessarily having a data set to start off with. And even if you're working in a reinforcement learning framework, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't be able to use some of the other techniques like statistical methods or Bayesian methods or deep learning methods, because they're just kind of tools within a tool set. And you could use deep learning to do abstraction or feature extraction and then still have a reinforcement learning framework. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it limits us per se. I think it's more about the notion that reinforcement learning kind of forces you to be data efficient and also have to start with not the notion of having a huge amount of data to start off with.
If there's no other question, I want
Sure,
to
absolutely.
ask a question. What's your business model?
Should we take it now or should we take it offline? So of course, I think we guys are working on building our platform, and so we'll be licensing our platform. Essentially, there's going to be an API out there and like a configuration tool where people can use it to train bots. One can think of it in terms of almost Adobe kind of a situation where we just give the designers a lot more controllability and ability to build more sophisticated bots for games and other environments. Yeah, sure.
I was wondering if you had an opinion on, since the AI is meant to be making decisions for us, let's say that I'm driving, I'm in a car, and the car is just about to hit a truck, and basically I could be saved if I was to turn left, or if the car was to turn left and hit some humans. What would be the right decision, to save myself and kill the humans, or to head straight to the truck? And what would be the right decision for the AI?
Yeah, so I think it gets into a slightly different domain of ethics, at which I'm not an expert, but I think also just to kind of step back a bit in terms of this entire notion of AI makes the decision for us. So I think it's a bit more kind of complex and human controlled than that, because in actually typical AI models and decision making models, there is a notion of a policy framework which effectively gives the constraints and boundaries and rules around how the decision should be made. Within that framework, the machine learning a bit works. I'll give you a very good example to kind of illustrate that point. Is when we guys were at Vocal IQ, we were building a voice dialogue system, and the first time we turned it on, it said all sorts of things, and then we had to put a policy framework so it spoke like Queen's English and didn't swear. And I think a very good place where something that like that wasn't applied was, I think Microsoft chatbot came out and was like racist and everything, right? Because they didn't have a policy framework. So I think that's the things that you could do. And eventually the decision around something moving at 70 miles per hour, weighing 2 tons, who gets saved and who not is down to the legal framework and basically ethics of that particular country and so on and so forth. I think it's, yeah.
So last question.
Yeah.
So actually,
No, I was just going to make a comment. Google, woman in chair chasing ducks. So the Google car actually found a situation where it found a lady in a wheelchair chasing ducks, and they videoed it. So they video everything, and Google car just stopped because it never dealt with that situation before. So it just stopped and said, "Human, you're in control now." I've never seen a person in a wheelchair chasing ducks before.